I stand at the altar in my Tom Ford suit, watching her father walk her down the aisle, and I can see in his eyes that precise moment when Richard Morrison realizes he has lost everything: his perfect daughter, his untouchable reputation, his control, and there is nothing he can do about it. Because if he speaks now, if he objects, if he makes a scene, he will have to explain why, and that explanation will destroy him faster than I ever could. The church is silent except for the string quartet playing Pachelbel, and I am 20 years old and I am winning. The harassment started when I was 17. My mother, freshly divorced and vulnerable, had just moved us into the house on Mercer Lane in Ridgemont, New Jersey, one of those suffocating suburbs where everyone drives a Land Rover and no one asks questions. Richard Morrison lived 3 houses down in a colonial that probably cost $3 million. Successful attorney, pillar of the community, Rotary Club president. The kind of man who wears his morality like a Rolex. He appeared at our door the second week with a bottle of wine and that smile. The one that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he'd said, his gaze lingering too long on my mother's collarbone. She was polite. She was always polite. Then came the coincidental meetings. He'd be getting his mail exactly when she pulled into the driveway. He'd be walking past our house during his morning jog, always slowing down, always waving. The dinner invitations she politely declined, the offers to help around the house that made her shoulders tense. I watched it escalate. The phone calls after 10 p.m., hanging up when I answered, his car idling at the end of our driveway on Saturday mornings. The way he'd appear at the grocery store, the dry cleaners, the bank, always where she was, always with that entitled smile that said he could take whatever he wanted and there was nothing we could do about it. Because what could we do? Call the police on the man who played golf with the police chief? File a complaint against the attorney who handled half the town's real estate deals? My mother was a divorced woman in a new town with no connections and a part-time job at a dental office. Richard Morrison was untouchable. I remember the night I found her crying in the kitchen, staring at her phone. Another text, another just checking in message at midnight. The smell of her chamomile tea had gone cold, and her hand was shaking. That's when I decided. I spent the next year transforming myself. I was already decent looking, took after my mother's side, sharp jawline, dark eyes, but I needed to become irresistible. I worked out religiously, sculpted my body into something that belonged in a cologne ad. I read voraciously, learned to discuss literature and philosophy and art. I watched how wealthy men carried themselves and mimicked their confidence until it became genuine. And I studied Caroline Morrison. Richard's daughter was 19, home from her freshman year at Yale, blonde, delicate, raised on horseback riding lessons and European vacations. She volunteered at the animal shelter on Tuesdays and got vanilla lattes from the same coffee shop every morning at 9 a.m. She was predictable. She was perfect. I engineered our first meeting at that coffee shop, spilled my drink, an Americano, black, sophisticated, on her white sneakers, apologized profusely, insisted on buying her breakfast to make up for it. She laughed, said it was fine, but I was persistent in that charming, self-deprecating way that girls like her found endearing. Within 2 weeks, we were dating. I became everything she wanted, attentive but not clingy, ambitious but not arrogant. I listened to her talk about her passion for environmental law and pretended to find it fascinating. I met her friends and made them love me. I was patient, gentle, the kind of boyfriend her sorority sisters envied. I didn't touch her for a month, let the tension build, let her think I was different from other guys, respectful, waiting for the right moment. When I finally kissed her under the gazebo in Ridgemont Park, she looked at me like I'd hung the moon. Richard didn't know who I was at first. Why would he? I was just some college kid dating his daughter, a young man from a nice family he'd never bothered to investigate. Caroline brought me to a family barbecue in July. Their backyard was obscene, all limestone patios and professional landscaping. And I shook his hand firmly, looked him straight in the eye. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Morrison," I said. He nodded absently, already half-turned toward the grill where steaks were smoking. But then Caroline mentioned where I lived. "Oh, he's practically a neighbor, Daddy. The blue house on Mercer, 3 doors down." I watched his face change, watched the calculation happen behind his eyes. Blue house, Mercer Lane, 3 down, the divorced woman, the son. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. His grip on his bourbon glass went white-knuckled. But Caroline was smiling, her hand in mine, and her mother was asking me about college. And what could he do? What could he possibly say? Over the next months, I made myself indispensable to Caroline's life. I became the person she called when she was sad, the person she envisioned her future with. I talked about marriage in vague, romantic terms that made her eyes glisten. I was building something permanent, something he couldn't tear down without collateral damage. Richard tried to sabotage me subtly, suggested Caroline should focus on school, mentioned she was too young for serious relationships, even attempted to set her up with the son of one of his partners. But I'd done my job too well. Caroline was in love, or what she thought was love, and the more he pushed, the more she clung to me. The real confrontation came at Christmas dinner. The Morrison house smelled like pine and expensive candles. Caroline's mother had made standing rib roast. We were all seated at their mahogany table that could seat 12, and Richard was at the head, carving meat with methodical precision when I made my move. "Mr. Morrison," I said, voice steady and clear, "I'd like your blessing to propose to Caroline." The knife stopped mid-slice. Caroline gasped, hand flying to her mouth. Her mother made a delighted sound. But Richard's face had gone completely still, a mask of barely controlled rage. "You're 20 years old," he said finally. "Same age you were when you proposed to Mrs. Morrison," I replied smoothly. I'd done my research. Caroline mentioned it, said it was a beautiful love story. Checkmate. Because if he objected based on age, he'd be contradicting his own history. If he objected to me specifically, he'd have to provide reasons. And what reasons could he give that wouldn't expose his obsession with my mother? That wouldn't make him look unhinged? "We should discuss this privately," he said, standing abruptly. I followed him to his study, all leather and dark wood and framed degrees. He closed the door and turned on me, and for the first time, I saw the real Richard Morrison, not the country club president, the predator. "I know what you're doing," he hissed. "Do you?" I smiled. "What am I doing exactly?" "Using my daughter to get to me. It's sick." "Sick?" I'll let the word hang there. "Tell me, Mr. Morrison, what's sick? Falling in love with a beautiful, intelligent woman? Or spending 2 years harassing a vulnerable single mother? Following her, calling her, making her afraid to check her own mailbox?" His face flushed red. "I never." "You did. I have phone records, timestamps. I've documented everything." I hadn't, but he didn't know that. "So here's how this works. You're going to give us your blessing. You're going to smile and shake my hand and pay for a beautiful wedding. And in return, Caroline never has to know what kind of man her father really is." The silence stretched between us, thick with hatred. "You're a fucking psychopath," he whispered. "I'll learn from the best," I said. "Do we have an understanding? He could have hit me. Part of me wanted him to. It would have been easier to ruin him that way. But Richard Morrison wasn't stupid. He knew he was beaten. "Get out of my house," he said finally. "Of course, right after you give me your answer, one I can share with Caroline and your wife." His shoulders sagged in defeat. "Fine, you have my blessing." That was 6 months ago. Now I'm standing at the altar of Street, Catherine's Episcopal Church, and Caroline is floating toward me in a dress that cost more than my mother's car, and Richard Morrison has to walk her down this aisle, has to place her hand in mine, has to sit in the front pew and watch me take his daughter as my wife. The look in his eyes is everything I wanted, pure, impotent rage mixed with grief and disbelief. He knows I don't love her, not the way she deserves. He knows this is revenge, served cold and permanent. But he can't stop it, can't even slow it down. When a minister asks if anyone objects, the silence is absolute. Richard's mouth stays closed. "I do," I say when it's my turn, looking into Caroline's tearful, joyful eyes. And when I kiss my new wife, I'm looking over her shoulder at my new father-in-law, and I'm smiling. The debt is paid.